There is a homeless man begging on the street. Let's call him James. Car after car and pedestrian after pedestrian passes James by without giving him any attention. Along comes a young man walking on the same street. Let's call him Brad. Brad sees James, reaches into his wallet, and hands him a $5 bill. James thanks him deeply, and Brad goes on about his day. After finishing his errands, Brad is passing by James once more and notices a few empty cans of beer, which weren't there a few hours ago when he first passed by. The realization slowly hits him that James, instead of using the money to buy what most people would consider a sensible purchase of food or living supplies, instead he spent it on alcohol. Brad doesn't engage him, doesn't confront him, but internally, Brad is furious, seething, out of his mind, angry. How dare James spend his hard earned money to feed his own addiction? But beyond his anger, Brad feels upset with himself, as though he was complicit in feeding the addiction of someone who just couldn't help it. He starts to blame himself and declares that the next time he wants to help, he will ask what the person needs and buy those items himself. This kind of story is one I've heard of pretty often. It's never the exact same story, but there's usually an element of giving money and there being a mismatch between how the giver hoped the funds would be used versus how they were actually used. The consensus tends to be similar that when we give to people in need, we should try to give materials rather than money because the person given to can use that money for whatever they want rather than whatever is best for them. This consensus is technically logical. After all, why should a person working hard to earn money donate the fruits of their labor to fuel someone's addiction, not their recovery? Charity is meant to be the concept which best represents ideas surrounding altruism and selflessness. It's the idea of giving of one's self without expectations of anything in return. The act of giving away the same heart and fuel, money, that the rich VIPs in Squid Game depend on to make themselves relevant in the first place. The platform of charitable giving is supposed to exist outside of the economic marketplace. It's supposed to exist outside of the transactional nature of society. That's why it's socially acceptable for legal nonprofits to, for example, have volunteers who work without pay, not be required to pay taxes, have missions that focus on alleviating suffering as opposed to focusing on earning a profit for private investors. Charity as a concept is supposed to represent a flow where money or labor is given, but nothing is expected in return. But in the story I told about Brad, even though he seems to be selflessly giving away money, his act of charity re enters the fiscal marketplace when Brad places terms onto his act of giving through his very mindset. Because Brad has expectations of how his money should be used, his actions have instead been made into a transaction. Instead of giving without expecting anything in return, Brad's expectations of the responsible use of his money places an unspoken burden on James. In reality, even if Brad witnessed James purchase something responsible like a blanket or canned food, this would make Brad feel better about his donation, but it still makes the interaction transactional. Making Brad feel good is the value he gets in return from the donation. I mentioned an idea earlier that because Brad worked hard to earn money, there is an expectation that his money should also work hard wherever it's spent. But this makes it seem like it isn't worthwhile to spend on a homeless man who isn't trying to recover, because money is worth as much as what it's spent on. It's like saying giving to a homeless addict who refuses treatment isn't worthwhile, but giving to an addict who is earnestly trying to recover is worthwhile because you, the donor, decided that it is. It's a need to control the outcome that the donation contributes to. This is seeking value, seeking return out of an act that is supposed to be totally unconditional. When we invest money into a company listed on the stock market, we have a stake in that company. That stake means we have a vested interest in the profitability of the company so that the initial investment we make can produce favorable returns for us. In Brad's case, him having a hope for favorable returns in James's life is the indication that Brad has really made an investment, not just a detached donation. His intentions towards James births a sense of responsibility for James's actions, that he now has a stake in the outcome of James's life. But why am I focusing on this at all? In Squid Game, we criticize the VIPs for exchanging life for money, but there's this perspective that their mindset is bizarre, unrealistic for the average person. In reality, the ways even we as ordinary people idolize money is comparable to the VIPs. By focusing on our hearts and intentions when humanity is supposedly at its most selfless, we can identify the ways money has a hold on us that parallels the wickedness of the VIPs. The hold money has on humanity isn't about the amount we have, but rather our relationship with our internal selves and the world around us. Squid Game represents the highest scale of harm proportional to the amount of money spent. But even in the case of spending $5 on a donation, our very mindsets, the posture of our hearts, can still birth darkness. How we spend money, especially when we are giving it away, delves deeply into the recesses of our identities and how we as individuals and as a society view money. Something important is hidden within our internal reactions when letting money go outside of the economic marketplace. Our reactions to how our money is spent can instantaneously transform a truly charitable act into a transactional act. This is a clip from episode 1. You could listen to the full episode linked in the description box below. Thank you.